Thank you for inviting us here to speak about Cobra, which I'm assuming if you're here, you know it means Copenhagen, Brussels, Amsterdam. We're here today because there has been a real revival or revisionist history that's starting to unfold. And this sort of sisterhood of Cobra in front of you are all protagonists in this rereading of this movement that in Europe is well known, but in the United States and in other parts of the world is relatively obscure. And through all of the activities of everyone here, I think we're all going to introduce ourselves. We have been trying to broaden the family tree of artists. It was a movement that is technically only runs for a few years, from 1948 to 1951, and involved artists from Denmark, Belgium, Holland, but also many other artists. It was a much broader movement than most art historical accounts give it credit for. So without further ado, because we have such little time, I'd ask all of my friends here to introduce themselves, and we're each going to give us short presentations about either exhibitions or other aspects of work that we have all been doing to broaden this reading of Cobra. To my left is Jacqueline. Jong.
I'm only Okay, I'm only an artist, so I don't really, I'm an artist that didn't belong to Cobra, but I'm legacy, if you could say so. And Alison is going to explain what my role is in the legacy, and Katja perhaps a little bit in Holland in the Cobra movement.
I'm Katja Weitering, Artistic Director of the Cobra Museum of Modern Art. I'm here today together with Curator Hilde de Bruin. We are situated on the city border of Amsterdam, and I will elaborate a little bit on the re-evaluation that has been going on at the Cobra Museum of Modern Art in the recent years regarding how to research, display and disseminate the heritage of this very revolutionary art movement. It's a pleasure to be here together with Jacqueline, who is a good friend of the museum. We've showed her work before in 2003, and most recently as part of an Esker Jorn exhibition in 2014. We've been collaborating with your great museum. You have an outstanding collection on Cobra, which has been a true pleasure to work together. And Alison, it's great to see a new generation of independent curators who contribute to this renewed interest in Cobra. So looking forward. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Clearwater. I'm the Director and Chief Curator, NSU Art Museum in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And we have the largest collection of Cobra in the United States in a museum. It came to us thanks to a very dedicated couple, collectors in Miami, who started collecting in 1958 when they first visited Denmark. And the collection grew to be enormous, and they always had in mind to keep it together in a museum. And in the 1970s, they donated part of it to our museum and then donated the rest of it in the late 1980s. And we've consequently have become the place where a good deal of the research on Cobra is happening. Not only do we have the art, but we have a very extensive archives. 2.5 years ago, we launched a series of 3 exhibitions focused on Cobra, and I'll be showing some of those as well. And we've been publishing, including our show that's now in Denmark, of War Horses, which is the first exhibition and exhibition catalog on the Hell Heston group, the group in Denmark. We've also taken this opportunity of having the strong focus on Cobra to make another focus of our exhibition and collecting policy to work with post-war European artists who are dealing with the trauma and disasters of World War II. And we're actually starting a new series starting this fall called Regeneration, and it will begin very logically with Anselm Kiefer.
Katja, I think you're going to show us some images of exhibitions and the collection, correct?
Yes,
from the Cobra Museum?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I became artistic director in 2010. That was 15 years into the existence of the Cobra Museum, which was founded in 1995. And at the time, we experienced a kind of identity crisis related to this fundamental question: how to research, display, and disseminate knowledge and the material and immaterial heritage of a very revolutionary art movement. Before I touch upon that briefly, a short history of this museum. It was founded in 1995, as I mentioned, and the basis was, just as in Fort Lauderdale, a private collection. At the time, the largest private collection in Europe of Cobra art, brought together by this collector called Karel van Stuyvenberg, who started collecting Cobra very much against the tide in the late 70s and 80s, when people weren't really picking up on the movement. Cobra always had a very problematic reception because I think of its very radical and revolutionary stance. So there was no real interest in the art market in Cobra. And this person established a great collection, and this became the basis of this Cobra Museum of Modern Art, which met with quite some resistance when it was established. For one, by the artists themselves. Most of the Cobra artists were still alive at the time, though two of the key figures, Esker Jorn and Christian d'Autremont, had already died. Some of the artists were in favor of a museum devoted to the movement, but some of them, like Karel Appel, which is of course an international artist and one of the most famous post-war Dutch artists, very much opposed against the museum, saying that Cobra was just a brief chapter in his artistic development. And someone like Rudy Fuchs, at the time the artistic or the director of the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, also advocated against a museum on Cobra, saying that you should never start a monographic museum and that you would isolate Cobra and that it was just a short-lived movement. Anyway, the museum opened. And it really developed into a museum of national importance. We collaborate right now on an international level with Fort Lauderdale, but for instance also with the Guggenheim Museum in New York, with Louisiana in just outside of Copenhagen. We managed to establish a great collection. We received many donations by artists. We have some of the most important archives. We currently have a show on Constant Nieuwenhuis, one of the founding members of the Cobra movement, also the creator of the important New Babylon project, and who was actually part of a Salon meeting last year at Art Basel. And we're preparing for this fall a big show on Pierre Alechinsky, who is right now showing one of his monumental paintings on Unlimited. So that is the history of the museum, and Hilde and I together were kind of feeling the need around 2010 to critically re-evaluate, as you mentioned, Alison, this art historical narrative of Cobra, because we felt we were repeating the same art historical narrative, mainly drawing on the same sources from historians who studied the movement from the 70s on, and we felt a need to also engage with the audience in new ways to broaden the different narratives on Cobra. So we set out to do different things. For one, Hilde has been our dedicated curator for contemporary art, making contemporary art an integral part of our program. We have felt a need for new research, so we established an honors program with the Gerrit Rietveld Art Academy. We also decided to look into the marginalized histories of Cobra. For once, maybe you will touch upon him, Ernest Mancoba, who was a South African artist who was part of the history of Cobra, part of the movement, who has been marginalized in art historical studies over the years. It was actually Hans Ulrich Obrist who put Mancoba forward again. So right now we're doing research into a Mancoba exhibition, maybe together with Tate. They have an interest in his work as well. We're supporting an independent scholar who is studying Mancoba. We're also looking into Enrico Bai, the experimental Italian artist, avant-garde artist who was also very important in the aftermath of Cobra, who collaborated with Jorn. We're going to put forward a show on his work. we decided to expand our exhibition program, connecting Cobra more to developments in the European, American, and global art worlds in the 40s and the 50s. So we made a substantial show on informal art, concentrating on Paris. We showed parallel developments in the United States by bringing the mid-art century collection of the Guggenheim to the Netherlands. So those have been very important projects, and also finding new ways to present our collection. I'll show you some images. We have quite a classical collection presentation at the Cobra Museum. It's the historical story of Cobra, of the development, the different members. And we decided to oppose this classical approach by inviting an artist duo from Denmark called Bank and Rauw, contemporary artists who during their art academy time were of course introduced into the legacy of Cobra, which they felt was something they had to break away from. And we invited them to study our collection and to engage in a long-term collaboration with these young artists and to allow them to give their own unique view on Cobra, which resulted into this collection installation with 5 different themes involving objects and archival material from our collection, new works of art by Bank and Rauw, and objects from daily life, centering around different themes such as the connection between life and art, very important within Cobra. A focus on the animal in Cobra, but all from their perspective. A focus on the unspoiled, or Cobra's interest in non-Western art and the non-hierarchical approaches to all kinds of cultural expressions. So this has been very much appreciated by the audience to the museum, to find new ways to engage with the story of Cobra. We presented new ways of making collection presentations. This is an example where we also showed clippings of Cobra artists by the end of their lives, in their 70s, 80s, being interviewed on how they looked back on Cobra, showing some of the mythology that has been going on around the movement. This is a presentation bringing together work from the legendary Cobra group exhibition at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam in 1949, in which we integrated very critical articles on the reception of Cobra, which was very problematic from the beginning. We invited the contemporary artist Chet Bird to reflect on that 49 show, which he did in a small installation focusing on the Cobra magazine, which was a very important medium for Cobra artists, and which was censored at the time. And this inspired him to make a new work of art. And we also included this work by the Dutch artist Jeroen Jongeleen, a contemporary artist. This is a quote from one of the popular websites that we have in the Netherlands, which is very right-winged, where people have all kinds of slogans and are usually very against contemporary art. And this is a slogan from that website saying, "This really looks like shit. This must be art. A child can make better work." This is one of the slogans that was posted on the website. And it's very interesting because this was part of the reception of Cobra in the late 40s, where a lot of critical reviews said that this was not to be taken seriously. And I'll close off with some examples of our contemporary art. Nathaniel Mellers, who will represent the Finnish pavilion on the upcoming Biennale, a presentation at the Cobra Museum integrating works from our collection, like here in the front, a painting by Karel Appel. He created a kind of nest installation. He is a British filmmaker, a writer, someone who combines all kinds of absurd, surrealist influences from multiple sources, which you can really, from an interesting perspective, link to Cobra. Here you see his installation, including also objects from the collection of the Cobra Museum. And just recently, Jennifer Tay, she is the only Dutch artist who is currently participating in Manifesta. Hilde made a presentation of Jennifer Tay, someone who's very interested in the spiritual, also in relation to the processes of making, the material aspects of art and different cultural sources, combining a lot of elements that were also very important within Cobra. So in closing off, as a museum, we are trying to adjust the narrative and especially to position Cobra as a very multi-headed creature, so to speak. We use the term the spirit of Cobra in order to engage with the public and also to find the relevancy of Cobra today and to connect it to, you know, the current issues and urgencies of this time.
Well, Katja, that was very interesting because I thought as an American collection, we had the hard time of introducing Cobra to American audiences. I thought it would have been taken just for, you know, your task would have been much easier than it was, but you've done a great job with your very innovative exhibitions and the scholarship that you and your team have been doing, and we're glad to be a partner with the museum. I'm your typical American art historian from New York. I was an abstract expressionist specialist. I headed the Mark Rothko Foundation, and I would say that I had the general idea of a New York art person towards Cobra, which was a more decorative, brighter form of abstract expressionism, and at that point didn't really give it that much thought until I started working with a lot of young artists, particularly artists from Europe. The most important was when I worked with Albert Oehlen on a show exhibition we did at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Miami in 2005, and I really credit Albert for opening me up to Cobra and realizing that it wasn't a formal or brightly colored abstract expressionism, but it actually had a lot to do with a philosophical point of view and a political point of view that was quite different from the Americans. The next artist that really opened me up to that was when I did Rita Ackerman's retrospective, and she too is all about Cobra. So I knew that the Fort Lauderdale Museum, the Museum of Art as it was known at the time, had the largest collection of Cobra. And I knew that they were poised to take off with all of this bubbling up and rethinking of Cobra. So I came into the museum 2.5 years ago as the director. With an exhibition that was a series of 3 exhibitions that were already in the works. The first with Katja and Brenda Zwart, who co-curated the show. And it was the spirit of Cobra, as you said. It was really, they had done the initial research on this collection, which I think is close to 6,000 objects. And putting it into some kind of order and understanding. So this opened, was actually the first show that opened when I was there. And just to give you a little sense of the scope of the exhibition. It includes a good deal of works from our collection, but also from the Cobra Museum and other museums around the world. So it was a good chance to study our collection in context. There was a great timeline in the exhibition, and there was a children's corner, which was an important part of the exhibition. The next show that happened was in 2015. Really key exhibition, looking at a very little known period. The artists, the Danish artists, were part of the Hell group under Nazi occupation. And Carrie Greaves was the curator on this, another one of these young art historians who are bringing new research to this period. To understand how the Danish artists under German occupation used their work as a form of resistance. And the exhibition actually is on view now in Denmark. Again, drawn from our collection and other museum collections. Luckily, we just got a NEA grant to restore these works. As you can imagine, the artists after World War II or even during World War II, the materials, either by choice or by not having the funds, are not of the best archival. And NEA just awarded us funds to restore the most important works in our collection, and I'm happy to say this work will be restored. Right now we show it flat because it's too dangerous to show it straight up. These are great. These are a nice surprise. Oh, and we did try to recreate the famous exhibition of, was it 13 artists in a tent? That under occupation, these artists actually had the guts to organize an exhibition of their work, a public exhibition of their work, in a, they pitched a circus tent next to an amusement park. Everything was very subversive. It was right there under everyone's nose, but it looked like it was a carnival. And we were able to get a number of the works that were in that show. And then coming up is Human Animals, which is actually going to open at the University Museum of Contemporary Art at University of Massachusetts Amherst this September, and then come to our museum, and then be at our museum in July. And these are just some of the, and that will be drawn completely from our collection. And then, as I mentioned, we've taken the opportunity of having such a major collection of Cobra to explore in a consistent, methodical way post-war European avant-garde or experimental work, particularly dealing with the trauma and disaster of war. So it made considerable sense to start that series with Anselm Kiefer. And that will open in November. I was with him on Wednesday, and I asked him whether, after a career of over 40 years, if he still felt he needed to work out these traumas of World War II. And, he was born in 1945 after the war was ended, but dealt with that post-war trauma. And he said it's still in him. He's still working it out. So it seems to be a very important subject for us to continue to investigate.
So I'm here actually sort of coming as a riposte to what was just said about the definition of Cobra. Last year I organized an exhibition called The Avant-Garde Won't Give Up, Cobra and Its Legacy. I don't know if we have the images. Here we go. Which is the title of this painting by Asger Jorn. And the essential argument of this exhibition was not only to introduce Cobra to an American audience. It was a show that was in New York and in Los Angeles. It was in two different parts. The New York show was purely historical, and it began with Hell Heston, the Hell Horse, this collective that was already mentioned, this pre-war avant-garde. And it continued through, in the LA show, to basically Asger Jorn's death, which Pierre Alechinsky, who's one of the few living members of Cobra still with us, in one of his excellent essays on the movement, basically said that Cobra died with D'Autremont and Jorn in 1973 and 1979. So for me, basically, the show was arguing for an expanded definition of Cobra. And that argument was very much indebted to several scholars who were mentioned before and who are contributing actually to the book that we are making for these two shows. I show this cover of the book that's coming out in the fall because in many ways it is part of this revisionist take that Cobra, for me and for these scholars, Karen Krzyzewski, who did her dissertation on Asger Jorn and has really become the new scholar of his work, and Carrie Greaves, who has done her dissertation on Hell Heston and has curated this important exhibition, as well as a scholar named Marie Godet, who's Belgian and has done her dissertation on Belgian revolutionary surrealism. These were all the theater groups that basically gave birth to this movement that only lasted a couple of years, but this show argues that there was Cobra before Cobra, and then Cobra after Cobra, which brings us to the Situationists and other movements that spun off from Asger Jorn's various experimentations. So by putting this image of Eugene Brantz with this fantastic mass, these assemblage sculptures that you both have in your collections, but what's significant to me in terms of a contemporary context is the performativity of this artist who not just made these tribalistic references and this fantastical experimentation, but it was this kind of performativity that anticipates so much of the types of practices we see in contemporary art today. So my show started with this work, a modification by Jorn, which technically is not a Cobra work because it was made in '62. It was a part of a series of thrift store paintings that he overpainted. And this one, you see the slogan in French, "L'avant-garde se rend pas," behind the figure of this Catholic girl receiving her confirmation. And this was sort of the springboard into the show. I wanted to show this image because it is an image that is very much part of the this revisionist history, because you see figures here. You see two women, Sonja Furlov, Mancoba. You see Else Adfeld, and you see on the right, on my right, sorry, your left, Ernest Mancoba, the South African artist who was part of this movement. My show began with Hel Heston. These are works, actually two of them lent by the Cobra Museum, by Jacobsen, and an early Asger Jorn, and Henry Hierup. Again, I show this image because Jorn, in terms of the argument of my show, which was not the conventional art historical take, really is the eye of the storm that drives the whole narrative of Cobra as one of the key thinkers who was deeply political, who, here, this was a room of works by Jorn and Constant, who were the primary discursive generators of Cobra through their magazine, which in an American context really, from my side at least, of getting into Cobra, is the way academia sort of receives this movement. They don't even discuss the painting as much as they discuss how it gave birth to Situationism and other sort of left-wing radical groups. This, I thought, was a nice thing to look at an art fair. One of the reasons why Cobra, and specifically Jorn's work, has maybe not been received, especially in a commercial context, was that his work was so deeply political. I mean, he was a committed communist, left-wing thinker, and he refused famously the Guggenheim Prize, and I think Jacqueline was even involved in the sending of this telegram because she was a collaborator and companion of Jorn. Is that right, Jacqueline? Yes. And he
It was actually refused by the post office because it was so nasty.
A lot of, especially in Denmark, a lot of curators and art historians like to speculate, had he not refused this prize, perhaps he would have this huge career and would have been considered part of this pantheon of the 50s and 60s of post-war art in a major way. My exhibition, again, foregrounded the work of Mancoba, who was a South African artist who emigrated to Europe to go to art school before the war. He was in Paris, and he met his future wife, Sonja Furlov. They returned to, he was actually interned in a camp during the war. Here's Sonja. And when the war finished, they went back to Denmark, and they participated in the first exhibition that was sort of the prefiguration of Cobra. It was called the Host Group. And that was when the Dutch experimental group and the Danish artists started to get together and show, and then they wrote the manifesto that began Cobra officially. Here's an image of Mancoba's work with Furlov's work in New York, and a fantastic Cornet, also from the Cobra Museum, and a really fantastic Hierup as well. This is another view of that same room with photographs of the Eugene Brantz Mass with Raoul Ubach and a selection of sculptures by Furlov. Another figure that I think that this revisionist family tree that we were trying to paint with this exhibition is a Japanese-American artist, Shinkichi Tajiri, who, again, through the lens of the present day, becomes a really interesting protagonist in this family tree. Tajiri was born in Los Angeles. He was a first-generation American who was also put in a camp by the Americans. In order to get out of the camp, he enlisted in the army and served in Italy. He was wounded. He returned to the United States and briefly studied in Chicago, but then decided to return to Paris. And he famously integrated himself into this milieu of expatriate artists in the immediate aftermath of the war. He founded the Galerie 8, which was a fantastic gallery, short-lived gallery in Paris that showed many important artists. And this is him in Paris in, I think, around 48, 49, with his one-day sculptures that he made. And he befriended the different Dutch artists who were in Paris at the time, Corneille and Appel, and became very close to them. He was invited in the first Cobra exhibition in 1949, and in the exhibition in New York, we showed the works that he showed in those sculptures, alongside these early Appel paintings that were very, typical of his Cobra period. And then in Los Angeles, this sort of brings me to fast forward to how that exhibition was structured and then how the argument kind of unfolded. I juxtaposed these historical works in Los Angeles with the works of living artists who, in one way or another, continued this legacy of Cobra, whether in an aesthetic way, in a political way. There were many different facets to it because the movement itself was so experimental and multi-tentacled. So here I showed these two sculptures by Tajiri with the work of a young Danish artist, Alexander Toveborg. I also included Wallace Ting, who was not an official member of Cobra, but who was a Chinese artist who emigrated to Paris in the 50s. He met all of the Cobra group. He then came to New York in the 60s, became friends with, he's best known for a artist book and series of lithographs with his poetry called A One Set Life that brought together figures as diverse as Warhol, Lichtenstein, and Asger Jorn and Alishinsky. He collaborated a lot with the Cobra artists. This is a modification that he made with Asger Jorn. So for me, Ting has a place in this expanded family tree of Cobra, and as does Enrico Bai and a number of post-war Italian artists who Jorn befriended in the 50s when he moved to Abbasola in the Ligurian coast. And he opened a sort of experimental ceramics group and had a political movement called, or politicized movement, I should say, the International Movement for an Imaginist Bauhaus, in which all these experimental practices were part of. And in Los Angeles, I exhibited works by the Cobra artists, and here you have ceramics by Jorn and Appel, as well as some folk work that Appel had created alongside some contemporary American artists who were using ceramics. And in the background, these are drawings by Eddie Martinez, an artist who's deeply interested and influenced by Cobra. And again, the legacy aspect was fleshed out in the show by bringing together artists of different generations who followed this paradigm of the modification, for example. So here you have the Jorn modifications alongside Julian Schnabel, his famous Blind Girl series. And here you have Carol Appel modification, Per Kirkeby modification, and the work of Mark Flood, who unknowingly was really enacting many of the ideas and the manifestos that Jorn was making even before the war in his Hell Heston period when he was writing about intimate banalities. Another sort of contemporary Cobra mashup. And I should probably now turn to Jacqueline, whose work was included in the Los Angeles show. Here you have a triptych of her work in the front, and she was another figure who I think, in terms of this broader art history and this broader understanding of Cobra, her activities as a member of the Situationist International, as well as her involvement with the Gruppe Spur and other sort of branches of the tree, really earned her an important place in that show and in this history.
Thank you again for having invited me. Well, in a way, it was because of the Gruppe Spur and Pinot Galizio in Italy that I more or less started as a painter. I had started, but that made that I went into that direction of completely free expressionism after having been more traditional. And of course also under the influence of Jorn, but not so much really of the Cobra, but the idea of Cobra was, well, sort of legacy to the Situationist movement in the very beginning, as long as the painters or the artists, visual artists, were still in the movement of until '62. The movement had this aspect, which changed very much and became much more famous than it was in what I call our time until '62. The International Situationist became very famous or very well known, mainly in the States actually, because of the theories of De Boer and Van Eyck, and also because of the books that were published. But another aspect is that, of course, Constant was, before I came in, was in the movement and started the new Babylon while he was in the Situationist movement. So all this is a sort of going further after Cobra into another aspect, which I think today is very clear with younger artists like Thomas Hirscher and like Jonathan Mazel, who is after us, coming here. I mean, there's lots, I could name lots of artists that are much younger than I'm an old one, that use or are influenced very much by the Situationists and by the Cobra movement, or at least by the freedom, the aspect of freedom in art, you know, well, you could say as well, literally, as in theory.
And here you have an image of Jacqueline with the Situationist Times, which was the English language, well, mostly it was in many languages, but primarily English language journal that she had proposed to publish, and De Boer did not agree with, but she went ahead and did it anyway, and we included numerous examples of this publication in our show because it specifically made this argument in the way that you brought in so many artists from Cobra and from this sort of broader legacy in the 60s into this journal that you published. And
well, this issue, which you can see there, which was presented in at La Une in Paris, Saint-Germain, was in a way influenced by 1 Cent Live, made by Valaseting, where he did what I wanted to do in this case, but he did long before me in a much, much smarter way. It's very, very beautiful, the 1 Cent Live. It is with all his friends, artists in New York, well, all around America. And it was something together friends and have them make a little on stone in, well, all in the same colors in the same way. 2 artists only used black, and that's Wilfredo Lam and Mata. But all the others did very, very nicely, did all the colors. Oh, this is more recent. That's a very recent thing. Well, I think you should tell about it.
Maybe,
Don't you think so?
yeah, well, we also, concurrent to our exhibition, Jacqueline published this artist book, which was a collaboration over many years that she did with Asger Jorn, and her papers have been given to the Yale Museum Library, correct, the Beneke Library, and some of these papers were part of this, but this had never been exhibited before, so we were very happy to collaborate with you and launch this book.
Which was very, very well done in Los Angeles. It was very beautiful. Well, this book actually is something which is not really a book, but a sort of cahier with engravings I made, wood engravings I made in '62 when I was very young, and Jan put them all in a sort of book, and we threw all the bits and pieces during all the years we had our relation, which had funny word plays made by both of us into this book during years and years, almost a decade. And I kept it after his death. I just kept it. And Yale, well, the Botanical Library wanted to buy it. And then I said yes, under the condition that it would be possible to make a facsimile of it. And that was done in New York last year. And two of the writers are sitting here. That's Roberto Art and Axel Heil. And I'm very, very grateful that you did write for this very funny, crazy experience.
And this should also be acknowledged for the wonderful Yorn exhibition that's in New York right now at Petzel, and this fantastic book that
which they made.
Yes, which contributes to this ongoing story. I think we're supposed to wrap up. I don't know if there's a quick question from the audience or... Yes?
Hi, my name is Kofi, and really this is for Katja, Weitering. I've been many times to Cobra in Amstelveen. It's one of my favorite museums in Amsterdam. Last year, I wrote to the director of Cobra. I live in Africa, though, and I see a number of artists, and some I know personally. So I wrote to the director and said, look, these artists, some of them are in their 70s, 80s, 60s. Some of them have never traveled overboard. But when I come to Cobra, when I see what's on the wall, I say, these guys I know here have the spirit of Cobra. So I had made a little proposal. Can we find a way to bring these old guys before they die to come to Amstelveen? The reply I got, I don't want to say that here, but did you get my letter? Did you ever read it?
I have to say, I'm sorry, it did not ring a bell. Maybe Hilda. I think Hilda is pointing. I think she's been in touch with you. But I mean, this is really part of our program and ambition to establish these intercultural connections and to expand the history of Cobra outside of those limited borders of Europe. So I'd love to take the opportunity to chat with you just after closing this. Thank you so much.
Well, Katja, that was also what we were talking about previously, that I've been working with artists who are in Africa and South Africa who told me that Cobra was very big when they were growing up and in South Africa. So in a way, it's not a coincidence that there is this connection, because the work was in South Africa when a lot of these artists were students. So it was something that we were discussing, not knowing you were going to be here in the audience today.
Should we say something about Amherst? Because Karen Kosinski, who is making this show you were mentioning, is invited also other artists than Cobra artists for human animal. It's called, I think, the same. Yes, it's also human animal, and I think Alison was involved in that. And I'm involved in the exhibition, and I'm going to give a talk there to it. Probably you didn't know about it. And I think it would be a very nice idea to talk with you and perhaps try to get an accommodation there. So thank you very much for...
Yes?
Hi, I still really don't understand what Cobra is, and I'm going to go look it up now, but since I'm in a room with experts, I figured it doesn't hurt to ask.
Is it? It was, in the narrowest definition, it was a movement that brought together artists from many different countries. It was named for Copenhagen, Brussels, Amsterdam, because the main protagonists who started the movement came from those cities, and it was very much a reaction to the dominance of Paris by calling it Cobra. They published a journal which had roughly 10 issues, but Cobra was a set of shared values and those values could be summed up as experimental art practice, interest in a kind of new populist art, the influence of the art of children, the art of the insane, spontaneous creation, collaborative works. And these artists all, as you could see, just maybe even intuitively from the slides that everyone showed, it's very wide-ranging in terms of the aesthetic look and the types of materials and practices, but there was a kind of shared purpose, and they were also bound together by politics. I mean, they were all very much believing in a leftist point of view. There was a utopian kind of drive, and there was a real rejection of the commercial. There was not this kind of interest in the value of art in the sense of today. So this kind of radicality was something that bound those artists together.
Which is also from a contemporary point of view, meaning that Cobra actually has a stronger legacy today than abstract expressionism did. I mean, in America, abstract expressionism led to this idea of progress and ultimately an end game, the idea that things were inevitable. Whereas the Cobra artists, there was already the conceptual, the collaborative, the anti-consumerism side, the idea of making art and even kitsch part of the work. I mean, life is part of the work, along with kitsch, which was completely the opposite of what was being promoted in America, especially from Clement Greenberg. At exactly the same time, Jorn is saying put kitsch and life into art. Clement Greenberg is cleansing it from modern art.
And that was so deeply political because his interest in this, what he called sofa painting, or these, these paintings that he used to make his modifications from, for him were as valuable as relics of humanity as, a marble in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They say as much about us as humans as any, highly valued classical culture. So there was this kind of anti-classicism that was very subversive and radical that bound all of those artists together.
I think that is also the importance of the legacy of Cobra today, just as you mentioned. This very radical stance and this emphasis on collaboration, a non-hierarchical approach to different cultural expressions, and a kind of counterculture. I think that really sums it up. Cobra was a counterculture that can still be very relevant today to view our own times and to define certain developments in contemporary art.
Yes, and there were bridges that we didn't even get to like the anti-cultural position of Dubuffet and Art Brut, which were all concurrent, and there were later friendships that emerged between those different positions.
That is also where the Situationist movement comes in. I mean, it went on. Cobra didn't stop with Cobra, which only lasted for 3 years. But everything went on. And I mean, you can even see here, when you look at many of the videos, it is really that language of freedom and counterculture, as you say, which goes on. And actually, that is also why Yale is so interesting, because they are the collectors of counterculture. And that is radicalism, goes on and on and on, and where we stand now today even.
And play was a very important part of it, and that's a great segue into your next speaker, to Jonathan Mesa, who is the ultimate, I think, legacy of Cobra is with Jonathan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.